I want to bring on my next guest. I think this is the first time he's been on the show, even though I've noticed him on Twitter and I've seen some of his other articles. Cal Anzalone. I want to get that name right. Is that correct? Anzalone?
Anzalone.
Anzalone, thank you. Cal Anzalone. He is opinion editor for antiwar.com, a news editor for Libertarian Institute. He hosts the Cal Anzalone Show. Is co-host of Conflicts of Interest with Connor Freeman. Thank you for joining me, man, especially on short notice. You doing okay today?
Yeah, doing pretty well. I think I caught a little summer cold from the baby, so if I sound a little congested today, that's why. But happy to be here and talking to you this morning.
No, you're perfectly fine. The baby, how old is the child?
She'll be 9 months next week.
Oh, so you're a new dad.
Yep, first time.
New dad. Congratulations, belated.
Thank you very much.
I know it's a lot of work. So there's that. So the reason I reached out to you, I've had Sarah Bills. Sarah Bills is on DDGO Politics, and she's talked about Peter Thiel and some of the things that he's effectively wanted to accomplish. And he is this Darth Vader-esque type figure as an oligarch of sorts. One of the main companies, Palantir, I think is the way it's pronounced. There are two stories that coincide with this. I want to hit the Palantir story first. This is a story you wrote for Libertarian Times, and just so the audience can see it. And when I cut this video, I will put it at the bottom of the video so they can read it. White House taps Palantir for government-wide database surveilling Americans. And you point out in the article right here, according to the New York Times report published on February, a key Palantir product known as Foundry has been used by at least 4 U.S. federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services. The firm is now speaking with other cabinet-level agencies. Now, this is an organizational company that backed Donald Trump. You can even see signs at Trump's rallies with Palantir in the background. And he effectively seems to be, I would use the term, feeding Americans to Palantir. So not just 3 agencies, but multiple federal agencies under this kind of like mass database of Americans where you can have this overarching and overwhelming surveillance of them having access to multiple sources of data and information. And people have even made the argument that Doge, part of its either a point or after effect, was to provide that information, for that streams of information to be given to these companies in this way. Give me your take on this. I mean, as you point out in the article, this is effectively government-wide surveillance of multiple federal agencies where it can collate information among disparate things. Social Security, Health and Human Services, Department of Education, pick any random thing, and all of that stuff can get collated for certain outcomes or surveillance. Give me your take on this. First, did I explain that right? And 2, step into the story for me.
Right. Yeah. And I guess, add just a few more details here. So what's going on and what we've known so far is that 4 government agencies have contracted with Palantir to use this Foundry system that they have to basically categorize and share all the information between those agencies. But next up, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Social Security Administration, the IRS are trying to also buy into that. And the Pentagon is as well. They're about to sign an $800 million contract with Palantir. So just in the first 4 months of the Trump administration, looks like that agency has, at least what we publicly know, racked up about $1 billion in contracts from the U.S. government. Now, they also have this program called Gotham. And Gotham runs in Foundry. So Foundry is the database. Gotham's the program that could search through and help agents find information on people very quickly. And I think initially some people might say, oh, this made sense. Why wouldn't the U.S. government, if they had this information, be able to search and find it very quickly? But, start to think about this really quick. For a lot of welfare programs in the United States that are means tested, you have to give your bank account information, all of your asset information to the Social Security Administration, the Department of Health and Human Services, right? Well, now the IRS, the FBI, all these other agencies are going to have access to that, the immigration enforcement. And my guess is that's really who gets targeted with this first. People who are in the country illegally, who have given their information to one government agency, either to get access to welfare, to register for jobs, to even pay taxes to the IRS, right? Then ICE and all these other agencies are going to have access to this. But also, I think this creates a real problem for even Americans who are unquestionably, like myself, who are unquestionably American, when we start to see the government, especially once the intelligence services start to have access to this information, and they're sharing, what the CIA learns from their overseas intercepts with the FBI to conduct domestic investigations, right? It's supposed to require a warrant for a federal police information to get access to your information. But if they could just go on Foundry and get access to all of your IRS documents, then that's a lot of information about you that they may try to prove that you committed a crime, whether you did or didn't. And so this information,
I think it's worse than that, by the way.
To be
But
shared.
please continue.
So this
I think it's worse
information
than
isn't
that.
intended to be shared. So I think this is a massive violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, I think of FISA for a moment. And I guess there are 2 points. Think of FISA in the way that they would have this, what is it called, reconstruction. So they would get information through a warrantless search, and then they would allow a federal agency to reconstruct in order to go after you for a particular crime, even though they didn't have any information about the crime in the very beginning of it. It was the FISA information that they were effectively using to reconstruct this case against you that they wouldn't have had otherwise if they didn't do this kind of illegal search. And as a software engineer, oh God, if you give me information, I can find all sorts of stuff. Like, meaning you're going to be able to write programs against Foundry and Gotham. I mean, think of writing a program to correlate information to go after political dissidents. Think of correlating information where these are certain people we don't particularly like. The Trump administration, for example, saying we're going to go after people who are critical of Israel. Okay, well, what does that look like when you have access to Social Security, Medicare, Health and Human Services, at the IRS? When you combine all of this information together in these agencies and a government that is motivated to go after various groups. And by the way, not just people who are critical of the issue of Israel. What about if you have a Democratic administration going after right-wingers? I mean, think about the way they were debanking people, for example, where they were like, we're going to cut you off from your bank account. Think of in Europe, where those journalists, they didn't like their point of view, so they kicked them out of Europe and cut off their access to their bank accounts. That is terrifying. That is terrifying. And, this is just the software part of it. I mean, this is the database part of it, where they're collating all of this information. We haven't even gotten to the AI version of it. So the other part of this that I want to piggyback on the story is the big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump calls it, that's going to put $20 trillion on the debt. In the big, beautiful bill, there's a provision, let me flip this over so people can see it, that allows the federal government, right here, subsection C states that no state or political subdivision may enforce any law or regulation regulating artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems during a 10-year period on the beginning date of the enactment of this act. So a big, beautiful bill that's supposed to be this kind of financial thing also has provision that allows the federal government to prevent any state from preventing or regulating artificial intelligence in its own borders, which is a power grab by the federal government in regards to using AI for mass surveillance. I think these two stories run in tandem. A, we're giving Palantir all of this data for it to be able to utilize. And B, the big, beautiful bill is going to allow the federal government massive powers in regards to using AI to mine that information for that surveillance. Give me a take on this. Am I being too draconian? I mean, for God's sake, they call the program Gotham. Right. Like, we're talking about Batman stuff, right? When Batman goes through all of the systems in order to find people. That's the program we're talking about, where Alfred was like, this is too much power for a person to have. And Batman destroyed the program after the fact because the program was effectively invading everybody's privacy. They named it Gotham.
Right. Yeah. I'm very concerned about this. I think the next step is using AI predictive models and effectively developing a Minority Report dystopia in the United States. For
Right there.
people who have seen that movie, you know, it's about predicting pre-crime, right? People get arrested because these machine humans in the movie, but in this case, it's just going to be this Foundry program where they have all this data. They're going to access it and they're going to say, oh, you know, we see this, and this, and that means we think you're going to commit a crime. And, you know, another piece to all of this, particularly the U.S. intelligence agencies have been buying up Americans' data that's available through Meta, Google, other. I don't know what policies each of these organizations have on selling
Basically,
information,
social media. Yeah.
but they do buy that when they have the opportunity to. And so again, you would assume that would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, right? If they can't show up to Facebook and without a warrant and just demand your information, they can't then go with a check and effectively bribe Facebook to circumvent the law. But that's how it's worked at this point. And so again, if they pile all this into a database and then they start trying to run predictive models off of it, I think we could be getting into pre-crime very soon. And I think it's worth mentioning here too, that I don't know exactly to what extent this has taken place, but Palantir has worked with the IDF and the Israeli government on putting together databases.
Yes,
we have reporting that says that Israel used Lavender, this AI tool, to basically give all the Palestinians in Gaza a social credit score, a Hamas credit score. And even the soldiers who operate it, Lavender, will say, like, you know, we are able to adjust different things in the settings for Lavender to generate 20,000 new names on the list and just add all these new targets. And in Gaza, being on that list marked not just you, but your entire family for death, because Israel would actually wait until you were home with your family to blow up entire families at a time. And you know, both Alex Karp, who is, I believe, the main guy at Palantir now, and co-founder of Palantir, Peter Thiel, have both been confronted over this and basically just shrugged and laughed it off. The official Palantir position goes something like this: we just make databases, we just make AI tools, and what the government does with it, they do with it. You know, that our role isn't to judge what people are doing with the information and the tools that we, and this would obviously be stupid if Lockheed Martin was saying it, right? If they were saying that, we gave these fighter jets to Israel, but we don't know what they do with them. Whatever they do with them is completely on them. And you say, well, obviously they're committing a genocide with it, right? And so I think that comparison works here.
Oh man, that's a fantastic comparison. Because, by the way, it didn't just sentence your family; it sentenced everybody who's in that apartment block to death. It would say, well, this is a high-value target. He was a Hamas dog catcher. He walks into his apartment building, and so we are okay with killing 100 people to get that one guy. Meaning that the program would correlate that information and give them the score about how many deaths are we okay with to get this one person. Like, I don't think people realize how extensive this is. Add to that, people talk about China and how anywhere you go in China, you're being videotaped, monitored, and everything else. This is something very similar. I mean, how difficult is it to add in video cameras? How difficult is it to track location data, track cell phone data, to track where the person is gone? And even more creepy, what happens to people who the government just doesn't like? Like, meaning the moment you get on the government shit list, what does it look like if the government decides, let's look into something for this person? Like if this was around during Martin Luther King's time and they were like, we need to find someone on that guy. Could you find something on that guy? Or find something on somebody who was bugging you as a political dissident in your country? I think people need to be very clear on where this goes. And it is dark. It is very dark. I agree with you 1,000% on this.
Can I just make one more point on this? And that is the effectiveness of these systems. Is, I think we kind of assume that they are generating these credit scores and they're actually hitting members of Hamas, but I'm very doubtful of that. I think, a lot of these people, maybe they have a cousin who's a Hamas official. Maybe, they just happen to live in a neighborhood where 2 or 3 other Hamas members live. And so, you know, you interact with the people in your neighborhood, you interact with your family members. That doesn't make you a part of that organization. And actually, the U.S. tried to do something like this during the Afghan war, during the surge. And Gareth Porter has done some fantastic reporting on this, basically saying that once you start to hit wrong targets, right, and you always assume that you hit the right target, right? So if a name comes up on a list, you take out that name, you check it off, and you say that person was connected to Hamas. Well, then every person that person is connected to is now being said they're connected to Hamas. When if this person was never really connected. So once you start having bad inputs in these systems, it compounds very quickly, and you're able, you know, to kill a lot of innocent people. So I'm very worried about not just the system being in place and if it works, but even if it doesn't work, once it's in place, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, I don't think people get the gravity of it. When this story came out, it was kind of like a shrug. And it's like, hey, you guys are shrugging for something. This is a bad corner to go down. Like, I am very concerned when AI gets fused with technology like this, and who's going to be operating that AI and for the reasons that they're operating it. Oh, I am very concerned. I think a perfect example. One of the things that they released when Joe Biden left office was that Joe Biden was trying to basically generate lists of people who were, let's say, dissidents. And going through social media posts, going through bank account information, and I guess coming up with some kind of score for the person that would determine whether they get certain jobs in the federal government. Is that really what we want? Like that, like the notion that the federal government doesn't, like, I guess my concern is political opposition to the government. It's American as apple pie. And are we going to get to the point where that is no longer the case? I mean, look at what Trump is doing around the issue of Israel, where he's literally deporting people for having an opposition point of view on that issue, where they are trying to criminalize opposition point of view. I mean, the boycott and divest sanction thing, for example, in various states where they were trying to pass laws to criminalize your right to not do business with Israel, or for that matter, speaking out against it. They were trying to pass this nonsense through law. Whether it got struck down by the courts is irrelevant to the point. The fact that they tried to do it, it's so anti-American, it is breathtaking. What does it look like when you add AI to that faculty, or you add Foundry to that faculty with Social Security? Hey, maybe we don't want you getting Social Security. Maybe we don't want you getting access to Medicaid. Maybe we don't want you to get access to food stamps because we don't like your point of view. I just think this goes into a very dark place. So I thank you for your article on this, highlighting it. Do you want to say anything on this? Because there's another story that you came up with that I want to hit, but last comment on this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, you know, even if it's not like they just outright deny your Social Security, but they say anybody with a score below a 30 or something like that, you have to reapply every 6 months, and they just put you in a bureaucratic hell. Right. Yeah. Anybody who's like may had an older relative, they help to like apply for one of these Social Security programs, knows it's a pain in the ass. It's a lot of work to you know, register somebody and get them signed up for that. And so if you know they're having to redo it every 6 months, is going to be completely exhausting and just require a lot of work. And it's, I'm sure, going to force just a lot of people to give up and say, well, you know, I don't have the energy for this. It's too complicated, and end up kicking a lot of people off of the roles of Social Security and other programs. And look, I'm a libertarian. I'm not for any government spending or welfare programs, but I'm more against. I strongly oppose and realize the bigger threat here is the attack on the First Amendment, and requiring people to hold certain political positions to have access to these programs is worse than just allowing people, everyone to be on them, you know.
And by the way, the IRS, like Nixon used to use the IRS as a political weapon to go after his political opposition. Is this a backdoor into being able to use systems?
Absolutely.
Like this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure that, you know, imagine if you audit your political opposition or people who donate to certain 501c3s, right? Let's say they decide that people who donate to antiwar.com, oh, you know, we got to look at you and give you an audit. that certainly, I think, would dissuade people from donating to certain
Yeah.
kinds of independent media outlets. And again, this is all ways that could be done. Just harassment to the point where people capitulate, because, being a dissident is at times, I guess, like, culturally expensive, right? Where you could lose some of your status for being outspoken on the war in Israel, particularly just after, or the war in Gaza, particularly just after October 7th. But
Right.
they're trying to make it financially expensive as well, and cut off your access to different programs and things like that.
Yeah, that's creepy. That is very creepy. I mean, leaking data, that's the other thing. Like, who knows what information can be leaked when the federal government has access to that stuff behind the scenes, because it can collate all of this information. Yeah, that's creepy, man. That is very creepy.
Yeah.
Great story. One of the other stories you hit it's not shocking to me. An argument is being made that I don't accept, that the deep state has surrounded Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump is boxed in by the deep state. So senators push bill to endorse major sanctions against Russia, because they are trying to get Russia to accept Donald Trump's nonsense, quote unquote, peace deal. And effectively, you get Lindsey Graham, who is acting as if he's the president, going over to Ukraine, Pompeo going over to Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, and it's effectively pushing for sanctions and pushing Trump to apply these sanctions. Now, I am not of the mind that Donald Trump is pushing for peace. I don't buy it. We can disagree, fair enough. But what he's put out is so ludicrous that I can't come away with the assessment that he wants an actual deal. Even though I think if he could get a deal on his own terms, maybe he would. Lindsey Graham's not for that. Many of these neocons are not for that. All of these guys want is perpetual war, meaning they want Trump to keep fighting that war, keep funding that war. You get Democrats and liberals who are like, hey, this is fantastic. Donald Trump should, immediately get behind this deal in order to put more sanctions on Russia to keep this war going. Give me your take on this. Like, I'm fascinated by this element where Trump is being moderately, okay, I'm trying to back away somewhat for this because I want to focus on China. And their response is, nope, we're not leaving this. We can do both.
Yeah. So, yeah, and on Trump's policy here, obviously Trump, if he's boxed in, it's because he's allowed himself to be boxed in.
Right.
He could pick up the phone at any point in time and call Vladimir Putin. He could set up a meeting between the two leaders. A lot of what needs to be done to end the war in Ukraine has far more to do with the U.S. military posture in Europe, war games, NATO war games that approach the Russian border, NATO expansion, and things like this, where I think if Trump went to Putin and said, we are willing to move. One of the most provocative things that the U.S. has done is they put the Aegis Ashore missile defense system in Poland and Romania. These systems can also fire Tomahawk cruise missiles and present a major strategic threat to Moscow. And I think if Trump picked up the phone and said he was willing to negotiate on those issues, he was willing to take permanent NATO installations out of the Baltic states to end U.S. and NATO war games in the Black Sea, then I think Putin would probably be willing to make some concessions on the ground in Ukraine. Now, he's not going to return all the territory, probably no territory that Russian soldiers hold, but the war could end that way. Trump could circumvent this entire neocon apparatus, Zelensky, all these people the Europeans who don't want the war to end, simply by picking up the phone, calling Vladimir Putin, and making a coherent argument for a peaceful resolution. He's incapable of doing that. And so is kind of being boxed in. I think his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is in league with he was a member of the Senate just a few months ago. So remember that. So he's in league with all of his former senators. This new sanctions bill on Russia has 80 co-sponsors. I couldn't believe it. And when does legislation ever have 80 co-sponsors?
And by the way, it's insane economically. The notion that you're going to put sanctions on India and China to the 500%.
Yep.
Is insane. You're just alienating two of the largest countries on the planet.
Lindsey Graham called it the most draconian bill he has ever seen in the Senate. Like it seems like it should be a joke that they're threatening to pass this, but they really are. And the Senate is looking to move forward with it. According to The Guardian, the Trump administration is going to try to walk the line by telling the Republican senators to vote your conscience on the bill. And since there's 80 co-sponsors, obviously it's going to pass, and then Trump will sign it into law, right? The House supports it. And so, you know, I do think there's an effort here by Graham and Rubio, and they've had like a couple little tricks they're playing, right? So the first one is the minerals deal. And I think this is probably the most key piece to this, because this is how they're going to sell Trump on sending Ukraine more weapons. I think they're going to invent a whole bunch of companies in Ukraine that will never turn a profit, that will never mine any material, but they're going to sell half of the value of those companies to American firms, and then they're going to take that money and go to the Trump administration. They're going to say, President Trump, I've raised $3 billion. I want to buy more weapons. Trump's not going to say no to that. During his first administration, he sold tons of weapons to Saudi Arabia because he thought selling weapons and making weapons deals made him look good. And so I think that's what we're going to see here, where they're pushing forward with the sanctions bill. I think the only good news is that it probably can't be implemented. The 500% tariff just sounds absurd, and that it's just not a practical number, right? If it was a 50% tariff, it would almost be more concerning to me, because at least that could take effect. But a 500% tariff is absolutely absurd. Also, a lot of the oil that Russia is selling to India is being refined and then shipped to Europe, and so the Europeans are going to suffer from this as well. So I just don't see this actually having any practical effect. And Russia has weathered all the other sanctions maneuvers that they've tried over the past 3.25 years now. So it seems so foolish, but Trump seems ready to move forward with it.
It's cartoonish. I mean, it's every bit as cartoonish as the tariff war, right? 140% sanctions. Okay, this is even higher by what, a magnitude of like 5.
Yeah.
So it's like the notion that you are telling sovereign states, hey, you can't do deals on your own with another sovereign state. And if you do, we are going to hit you with a 500% sanction. Are you out of your mind? And you really honestly believe that India and China are going to be like, okay, well, we have to follow America's dictates. You really believe that? What is it going to do to the world's oil markets? What is it going to do to the price of oil in the United States? It is going to go through the roof. Meaning, either they don't get that. Like, it's one thing if you use it as a threat. Okay, but the threat is even so ludicrous that you're almost like, do it. Let me see you do it. Let me see you implement that. Have at it. Let's see what that looks like in real life, right? But do you really get the sense that effectiveness and competence is something that comes out of Washington?
It's getting worse administration by administration, right? Where the first Trump administration was fairly pathetic. The Biden administration was unbelievably pathetic. And the new Trump administration is not only pathetic, but also filled with a lot of morons, right? Yeah. Like, Antony Blinken was obviously quite a bit more intelligent than Marco Rubio. And there's a few other examples you could make of that, where even if the policy was evil under both administrations, the people trying to implement that policy and come up with it. Kristi Noem, right, recently couldn't articulate what habeas corpus was. Right, like just these kind of examples where, look at Pete Hegseth, right? This guy has a Twitter, a Signal chat, giving information, Pentagon information, battle plans to his wife. I mean, it's a level of incompetence that's really unbelievable, right? I often say that if you were writing a movie script, you had to revise it because they would say like, this is too heavy-handed. We get that you're trying to make the point, but make it more subtly. And that's just how incompetent these people are at this point.
It's idiocy. It's the movie. Tevroll and I were talking about this the other day. It's like idiocy, the movie, like where the IQ of the nation has gone down because stupid people kept breeding, smart people stop having kids. And then you got like 100 years and the president is like a wrestler. You've never seen this movie? It's a cult classic. It's and a random man, average intelligence, ends up into the future because he is like a hibernation tank by accident, and he's like the smartest man on the planet because of all of. Oh man, it is.
I haven't actually watched the movie. I do remember, back in the day when you actually watched like network TV, I was watching something in the beginning came on and I just had to get up and go. But I have seen the promo for it and get the plot.
Watch the movie. You will be shocked at how very similar things have gotten, where you're like, there's no way. And it's like, yes way. They don't know anything. Like, and the sad part about Trump is I don't think he knows anything. I get the sense that somebody comes in, Kellogg, for example, I would say, hey, this is a plan that Putin would accept. And when Putin says no, he's confused. But my guy said he's accept this. My guy said this was a good deal. My guy said this. My guy said that. I don't think, two things. For one, presidential policy typically doesn't really care. They have an objective that they want to accomplish. And us as a hegemon looks at it as, well, the world is just going to do what we tell them to do, or we're going to put pressure on them. Diplomacy is no longer a thing in regards to the way that the US government operates. So there's that. Two, I don't think he knows anything about any of these issues in real terms. He has a constituency that he needs to effectively please, and he works on that model. And so I have a bunch of neocons around me. They want me to do this for Iran. So I can't accept the deal from Iran that Iran has said is a red line. And so I need to keep plugging in a direction, despite the fact that I have no progress to make on this. I want to make a deal with the Russians. I said I was going to end the war 24 hours. That was always a lie, but whatever. I'm going to try to end the deal. Oh my God, the Russians are not going to accept my plan because from their point of view, it's existential. And we've been pushing NATO up to the border. He seems completely confused by all of these conflicts. I'm going to have a trade war against the world. I'm going to have these random sanctions or random tariffs. And then when the world looks at this and says, are you out of your effing mind? The bond market flips out and he has to back away. And then he gets pissed off and they call him Taco Trump. Like, this has been a cluster of an administration. I mean, give me your take on that. I mean, maybe I'm being, some people may say I'm being too brutal. I don't think I'm being brutal enough, frankly.
No,
and one last point. And as a libertarian, I'm very curious on your take on this. Putting $20 trillion on a $36 trillion debt.
Yeah, well, I'm opposed to this spending. I'm for massive government cuts. Of course, corporate welfare first. That what needs to go is the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars that's doled out to the Pentagon contractors every year, and then major haircuts to particularly U.S. agencies and departments that just the CIA, the intelligence community, the Pentagon all need to have significant cuts to even. And I do agree with like some of the Doge cuts when it comes to foreign aid and things like that, which I do think are largely corruption projects in foreign countries. The rare case where they're actually have a hospital that's giving out vaccinations, sure, don't cut that right away. But most of what these NED type organizations are doing are regime change operations, are regime propping up operations meant to help placate the population in those countries, so there's a more favorable government in the capital city, so their foreign policy matches what the United States wants. So on Trump though, I do oppose most of what he's doing here. I think I generally agree with you where he doesn't have a deep understanding of the situation. I think if he would never be able to sit down with you or me and have a conversation on what the U.S. military posture is in Europe. Like what, other than NATO expansion, what provocations has the U.S. done in the continent over the past 3 decades that provoked Russia to invade Ukraine? He doesn't know this stuff. He seems to often know things in the kind of slogans that he says and repeats. At times this means you get little details on conflicts that you wouldn't normally get, talking about how high the death count is, how many people are dying in Ukraine. I think when he said there was like between 1.5 and 1.8 million Palestinians left in Gaza, I think that was probably a serious estimate that he had gotten, and that's like the only fact he knows. So he's just repeating it over and over again.
That would mean
he just doesn't know very much, and certainly doesn't know enough. I think that's the case.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. So, yeah, my general thinking on Trump is he doesn't know a lot, and when he does learn things, he learns it in, slogans, one point at a time. And it's good that he does know that point, and it's good that he tells the American people that point at times. But it's just unfortunate that he doesn't understand the situation deeply enough to actually resolve it. Because again, as we kind of talked about at the top of this story, it really would require a lot of presidential action and weight to end the war in Ukraine. He can't just tell Marco Rubio, Witkoff, Kellogg, I want this war ended. They're going to lie to you. They're going to undermine you. The same way during his first administration, he said he wanted to remove the troops out of Syria, remove the troops from Somalia. And what happened? His administration, the officials that he hired, right? The people who worked for him just lied to him and manipulated the situation. And we didn't get out of it.
Trump was president once. And so, that's why I don't give him a pass on this. It's like, dude, you were president once.
Yep.
You believe that the people were lying to you, who you've hired and brought around you. And yet you filled your coffers with a bunch of neocons and lunatics. Again, I mean, you could say Gabbard, but Gabbard apparently is trying to do a picture book for him for national security briefings, which is just humiliating because Trump doesn't read, apparently, which is astonishing. The president of the United States doesn't read. But you brought in Kellogg. You brought in Huckabee as the person for Israel. Yeah. You brought in all of these people in white jobs. I mean, do you think that's what's happening? That they're effectively undercutting his plans in the context of his administration? I don't. But again,
yes and no. I think there's, a lot of yes men and people who just go along with the policy. I mean, this is apparently even what's happened with Tulsi Gabbard, right? The advantage of having Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence was supposed to at least be that she could recognize the difference between a Sunni and a Shia militant in the Middle East, which means in Yemen, the threat is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, not the Houthis. And yet Trump spent billions of dollars in 3 months bombing Yemen, killing hundreds of people against, again, a group that is opposed to Al-Qaeda. Now he's embracing, now that Assad is gone in Syria for his first administration, remember, he was a key player in the regime change in Syria. So now that the Bashar al-Assad government is gone, sure, he was a dictator, but he wasn't a dictator who ruled based on jihadist beliefs as the new leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani does, and suddenly we're embracing Damascus. It's absolutely absurd that we're seeing the policy we are with even Tulsi Gabbard in there. So I mean, that suggests to me she's just somebody who falls in line on these issues, and that's why I say on the Signal chat she wasn't really arguing against and doing everything she can to prevent the U.S. from bombing the Houthis.
No. In fact, Vance seemed to be less enthusiastic about it. He was a team player. He was like, look, I'm a team player, but if this is what you guys want to do, but this is not our issue. We only get 3% of our stuff through shipping through this region. So why are we doing this? And yet, here we are. Here we are. Last point. What do you think of MAGA on this? I mean, I don't like either political party. I think both are cults. And I think cults are problematic either way you look at it. Like, you have a president who, some of the stuff I agree with, no tax on tips. Fair enough, put more money into the hand of people who need it, right? We're going to end the war. Thank you. Why are we spending hundreds of billions of dollars pushing for another Cold War that could end up in a nuclear war? Like, meaning some of this stuff I fundamentally agreed with, and MAGA seem to agree with. Trump gets in office and he doesn't do it. Or he puts it forward in a way that has no chance of, it's like if I'm offering to buy your car and you and I engage in a negotiation. And I said, I give you $1 for it. And if you don't give it to me, I'm gonna break your knees. And you say, okay, well, I'm not, what kind of big deal negotiation is that? That's the deal, that's the negotiation. And then I pull away and say, okay, well, he's not interested in negotiating. Okay, but the premise was so ludicrous that there was no way, that's not a real negotiation. That's not a real engagement. And I know as a libertarian, I would imagine your belief is a negotiation is any deal that you can walk away from. Meaning it's not compelled through force. It's we're making a deal that is in mutual best interests. MAGA doesn't seem to get that. And whether it's this American stuff on Israel, where we would go after people's First Amendment rights, whether it's the stuff of not ending the war and his deals that he's putting forward that have no chance of succeeding, they seem to be in lockstep with him all the way through, every bit as much as Democrats were in lockstep with Joe Biden, even though he was weakened at Bernie's. It's frustrating to me looking at this level of political capture. I don't know what's another word for it. Yeah. Give me a take on this. Or do you see them weeding themselves away, or they're really taking issue with some of the things that he's doing?
I mean, yes and no, right? I think the majority of the MAGA movement are really just Republicans, right? And they, like rank and file Democrats, just they vote red, they support red, whatever said on Fox News, whatever the White House press secretary says they're going to be opposed to. I do think there's like an interesting phenomenon within the MAGA, the leadership of the MAGA movement, and a part of the MAGA base where they are legitimately upset about some of the things that Trump is doing. Elon Musk just came out against the big, beautiful bill. That's, I think, notable.
Right.
If you look at even the MAGA reaction to the, Glenn Greenwald video that was released, a lot of them were like, he's gay. We all knew he was gay. I don't support the gay things that he's doing, but he's a fantastic journalist, and it's wrong that somebody released this to try to silence him. I do notice on social media, say Mark Levin posts something about how, everybody is anti-Semitic if you don't support Israel. There is a lot of young Republicans in his replies absolutely annihilating the old man.
Really? I could see Bannon flipping out too. Yeah.
I do think there are certain places where they're willing to deviate from Donald Trump more publicly than at least I notice on the Democrat side when, say, Joe Biden in office. But that being said, I don't see them actually taking the steps to hold the Republicans accountable, right? Which means at the ballot box. Replies to Mark Levin on Twitter, polling that shows half of young Republicans don't support sending weapons to Israel are I think real and meaningful changes that shows that the MAGA base is willing to deviate from Trump to some degree. But unless they're voting Republicans out of office, like Mike Johnson, like the Senate leader John Thune, then I don't think it's really Lindsey Graham's another example. Then that change isn't going to have any actual effect, even if the thinking has altered some from the Republican base.
Permit me to ask you one more question on this, because I'm fascinated from a libertarian point of view on this. Oftentimes when I'm talking to people, they tend to be on the left, not Democrats, but on the left. Like the, let's say like working, not even the woke left, workers left, where they want this kind of lefty policy in regards to workers, Medicare, Social Security, et cetera, increase in wages, those type of things, abundance left. We have often on the left come to this assessment that this is a captured process, that the political process no longer works. It no longer produces people who are competent. It produces people who are effectively craven. The richest man on the planet went after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and even if you don't agree with those things, at the very least, that is something that is there and has been there for a very long time, that is in the interest of, at the very least, the poor and middle-class Americans, that most people, when they hit 65, they're going to depend on and they're going to need. The richest man on the planet decided to crush those things, firing American workers, taking what the Republicans are trying to take like $1 trillion out of Medicaid in order to give tax cuts to the top 1% and 0.1%. Meaning this is, and put this stuff on the public purse. So the fact that they're putting $20 trillion in order to give people money is pretty astonishing. But that's the way our government has become. It's, if you ask the American public, are you okay with that? The majority will say no. If you ask them if they're okay with tax on tips, they would say, yes, we like that. Put hands into the people of the money of the people who need it. Most people work service jobs. Those people get paid trash. So if we can indeed help them, fair enough. And every lefty I know that is also for it. The other way, not so much. But that's the political instrument. And that's the people that this political instrument puts out. The Israel thing, the majority of Americans also have said, we need to stop sending weapons to Israel. This is outrageous. Piers Morgan, for God's sake, has been dragged onto the side of saying, okay, Israel has gone too far. When you lost Piers Morgan, you've lost the plot, right?
Right.
And yet, the political instrument doesn't produce people who say, we need to stop sending weapons and money to Israel. They're committing a genocide. The political instrument no longer works. It seems to be captured. So say, for example, you vote out Lindsey Graham. Who would you put into his place that would have any kind of political benefit that would be to the detriment or to different than the current policy and the way that Washington runs? And the answer is nobody. Then you're screwed. Like, I don't know a way out that box because it doesn't seem to work. I can tell you on the Democratic side, where Democrats sitting in the thing say we can lie, cheat in a smoke-filled room and choose whatever candidate that we want. That's what they were saying in court when they were cheating Sanders in that race. Trump, they didn't have to deal with superdelegates, so Donald Trump was able to win. If it wasn't for that, though, if they had superdelegates, Trump would have been taken out every bit as much as Sanders would have been taken out. So how do you move forward in a political process that seems to be effectively captured by a certain class on either the right or a certain class of either on the left? I don't know way out the box.
I mean, I largely agree with you that there's typically not political solutions to these problems, at least not through traditional and federal level politics. I mean, when I was coming up in the libertarian movement, it was the Ron Paul 2012 campaign in the Republican Party. They stole a primary from him. I think he won Iowa that year, and they just lied and stole it from him. At the time, all the libertarians would post the memes online where Fox News would rank the top 5 Republican candidates. Number 1, number 3, number 4, number 5.
Yep,
number 2 was Ron
Paul. Number 2. I remember that. Yeah.
And they wouldn't put him on the screen. All the debates, he would absolutely annihilate the competition with the least amount of speaking time. Right. And so I saw how rigged the political process was. Now, I guess 2 points that I would make where maybe there is some room for optimism are the reason why it may be beneficial to vote out somebody like Lindsey Graham is, if Lindsey Graham gets voted out, he has 99 colleagues in the Senate who do take note of that, right? Who these people want to stay in the Senate forever or get promotions to the federal government, right? They don't want to be voted out of office. And so if Lindsey Graham is voted out of office, particularly if it's over a certain political issue, not because of some set scandal, not because of, people just generally dislike him now, but let's say he's voted out specifically based on the war in Ukraine or the war in Gaza, then again, it's probably not enough to like flip the other 99 members, but let's say 3, 4, 5 senators get voted out over a course of a couple of years. I do think you would start to see at least some rhetorical shift in Washington and probably a little bit of a policy one too. I mean, it took a couple decades, but now most members of Congress will say the war in Iraq was a mistake at the very least, if not go further in their criticism of that. And then the last point I would make here is I think the Libertarian Party actually did some good work on the transactional level during the last presidential election where there was something of an endorsement by the libertarians of Donald Trump. I didn't vote for the guy. I know a lot of libertarians who did. And one key figure in the libertarian movement, Ross Ulbricht, who, from the libertarian perspective was arrested for designing a website where people were able to trade goods that may not have been legal according to U.S. law. But at the same time, from the libertarian philosophical perspective, adults should be allowed to exchange drugs for money, no matter what those drugs are, and not face persecution for that. And so,
by the way, I agree with you on that. I don't think drugs should be illegal. I know a lot of people disagree with that. I don't think people should be put in a cage for using drugs. I'm sorry. Please continue.
Yeah, but anyway, my general point is that you see around the world, because I'm into foreign policy, so I see other elections, and a lot of times countries have more parliamentary systems where they elect a certain number of Knesset members who then get together, form a coalition, and get a prime minister. And so this means that say in Israel or something, the prime minister's party isn't the same party as the defense ministry, the finance ministry, the national security ministry, right? All of these are different, and there's exchanges made. It's very transactional. And so certain members, they get pardons, they get other concessions, and I do think that could be a way forward for people on the left pressuring the Democrats, people in the Libertarian Party primarily pressuring Republicans to make certain concessions. Of course, we're not going to get a lot. All politicians lie, and so for all the hopes that libertarians had around Doge, it's completely failed. I am more than willing to acknowledge that. But getting Ross Ulbricht freed, I think, was the first victory that libertarians have had on the federal level, maybe ever. And maybe this is a path that, again, people on your side of the aisle, people on my side of the aisle could go down to try to get some even minor policy changes, because at times, minor policy changes could have massive impacts. It's easier for me to think about on the state level, like getting rid of some of these job licensings where you had to like have a certification to braid hair or to cut hair or, do all kinds of other things, which it's almost all cultural anyways. Like, this shouldn't be regulated by the government, and getting rid of those kinds of laws can make massive differences in people's lives and in people's community. Some of the zoning rules that I think prevent neighborhoods from growing in the way they should, let's try to make some changes and things like that, and I think it can be done.
Fair enough. I accept that. I do accept that. And that's the thing with libertarians. There is overlap between what would be considered the left, and I don't mean Democrats. I just mean the political spectrum of the left, and especially on this stuff of anti-war. I mean, I have Dane McAdams on the show all the time, the Ron Paul Institute, and from the Ron Paul Institute, speaking of it. And he used to tell me that there used to be a coalition of anti-war right and left that used to dovetail on certain issues, and somewhere along the way, it just fell apart. So, Cal, thank you for this, man. I hope this wasn't too much of a pain. I really appreciate you joining me on this great conversation. And just so the audience would know, Cal Anzalone. I'm horrible with names, which is why I'm being very careful when I pronounce. I butcher names in a heartbeat. Cal Anzalone. He is opinion editor for antiwar.com, news editor for the Libertarian Institute. He hosts the Cal Anzalone Show and co-hosts Conflicts of Interest with Connor Freeman. You started the Libertarian Institute page, correct? Or am I getting wrong?
Scott Horton is the founder and director of the Libertarian Institute. I would say, like, in the first, half dozen of people who worked at the Institute, I was probably there pretty early on after it started.
Okay.
About a decade ago now. I think 2015.
By the way, great work. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay? Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Great conversation. I really appreciate him joining me for us to have that